All right, let's get right into this explainer. If you look at a map of Europe today, most of us can easily point out the island of Ireland, right? But far fewer people can actually explain the complex reality on the ground there. We're talking about a 310-mile border that separates the Republic of Ireland, which covers most of the island, from Northern Ireland, which is one of the four nations of the United Kingdom. It's a modern geopolitical reality, but one that has incredibly deep roots.
So you might be wondering, why exactly is this island divided into two totally different nations? To find the answer, we can't just look at recent events. We're going to go on a chronological journey through thousands of years of history. We'll look at the waves of invasions, the wars, the migrations, and the deep divisions that basically acted like falling dominoes, each one crashing into the next to shape the island we see today. To piece this together, we're going to quickly walk through 5 main eras: Gaelic roots and early invasions, conquests and plantations, the tragedy of the famine, rebellion and partition, and finally, the troubles and modern peace. Okay, part 1, Gaelic roots and early invasions, taking us from the origins all the way up to the 15th century. So picture this. You've got Iron Age Celts who established this vibrant Gaelic society of clans, chieftains, and a Druid-led religion. But the outside world eventually came knocking. By the 5th century AD, Christianity arrives, with missionaries like St. Patrick. This actually brings literacy to the island, leading to magnificent monastic creations like the Book of Kells. But, all that wealth attracted Vikings around 795 AD. The Vikings end up establishing Ireland's first true towns. Take Dublin, for example. It actually grew incredibly wealthy as the largest Viking slave market in Western Europe. After the Irish High King Brian Boru finally broke Norse power at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014, a brand new threat emerged. In 1169, Anglo-Norman knights arrived from Britain. Now, they were initially just invited to settle a local family feud, but it ultimately opened a massive door for English kings to claim authority over Ireland. Moving right along to part 2, conquests, plantations, and penal laws, spanning the 16th to 18th centuries. The real catalyst for this era was the Protestant Reformation. It sparked this aggressive Tudor expansion into an Ireland that fiercely refused to abandon Catholicism. And this sparked a brutal sequence of events. The Tudor conquest in the 1530s saw English law aggressively pushed onto the island. The Gaelic chieftains obviously resisted, culminating in the 1590s with the 9 Years' War, led by the powerful Hugh O'Neill. O'Neill fought valiantly. He even secured aid from Catholic Spain, but the English completely crushed their alliance at the Battle of Kinsale in 1601. Just a few years later, O'Neill and other lords fled to Europe in what's known as the Flight of the Earls. And with them gone, the old Gaelic order effectively collapsed. To secure their new control, the British Crown launched massive colonization projects. The most notable was the 1609 Plantation of Ulster, where they gave confiscated land to Protestant settlers from Britain. Simmering tensions naturally exploded in the 1641 rebellion, and the English response to that was just devastating. Oliver Cromwell arrived in 1649 and waged a merciless 4-year campaign. To put this shift into perspective, by the 1650s, Irish Catholics, who used to own pretty much the whole island, now held roughly 10% of the land. It's a catastrophic demographic earthquake. After a brief Catholic uprising in the late 1600s was defeated, the new Protestant ascendancy really locked in their power. They rolled out a harsh regime called the penal laws. The Catholic majority was stripped of their most basic rights. We're talking no serving in parliament, no voting, no holding public office, no owning firearms, and no inheriting land. The dispossessed Irish Catholics, who made up over 3/4 of the population, were relegated to impoverished tenant farming. As you can imagine, the systemic disenfranchisement completely ceded the roads of republicanism. Inspired by what they saw in the American and French revolutions, radicals led by Theobald Wolfe Tone launched a massive uprising in 1798 to establish an independent Irish republic. The rebellion was brutally suppressed. In response, Britain passed the 1801 Act of Union, which abolished the Irish Parliament and meant Ireland was ruled directly from Westminster. It wasn't until 1829 that the Irish politician Daniel O'Connell finally achieved Catholic emancipation, repealing those odious penal laws. Which brings us to part 3, the tragedy of the famine in the 1840s. Right as some political progress was being made, it was completely undone by disaster. 8 million. I really want you to hold that massive number in your mind for a second. That was the population of Ireland leading up to the 1840s. It emphasizes the sheer scale of the society that was standing right on the brink of absolute disaster. You see, the rural poor relied almost entirely on just one crop, So, when a fungal blight struck the potato crop in 1845,
The results were literally catastrophic. Between 1845 and 1849, approximately 1 million Irish people died from starvation or famine-induced disease. Another 1 million had to flee the country as refugees, mostly heading to the US, Canada, Australia, and Britain. By 1850, the island's population had plummeted by a quarter or more, and the response of the British government was incredibly slow. Food was actually still being exported from the island during the crisis. This fundamentally broke the old Gaelic-speaking lower classes. The profound grief and the anger over how it was mismanaged fueled a deep generational resentment that would drive a ferocious push for self-governance.
all right, part 4, rebellion, independence, and partition. We are into the early 20th century now.
Decades of stalled political movements were about to give way to explosive actions. In April 1916, a secret group launched the Easter Rising, an armed insurrection right in Dublin. It was crushed by superior British forces within a week. Now, initially, a lot of the Irish public didn't really support it, but Britain made the decision to execute the ringleaders, and that rapidly swung public sympathy right toward the rebels. By December 1918, the Republican Party Sinn Féin wins a landslide election. The newly formed Irish Republican Army, the IRA, begins this intense guerrilla war against British authorities, using hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, you name it, in what became the War of Independence. By 1921, both sides are just completely exhausted. This leads to a brutal geopolitical compromise called the Anglo-Irish Treaty. The island gets partitioned, 26 counties become the Irish Free State, a self-governing dominion, but 6 northeastern counties in Ulster, which had a Protestant Unionist majority, opted to remain in the UK as Northern Ireland. This partition ended the war with Britain, for sure, but it deeply divided the Irish. It sparked a ruthless, fratricidal civil war in 1922 between pro-treaty forces led by Michael Collins and anti-treaty forces led by Eamon de Valera. Ultimately, the pro-treaty side won out. Finally, part 5, the Troubles and modern peace. From the late 20th century up today. Following the Civil War, the South marched steadily toward becoming the independent Republic of Ireland, but Northern Ireland remained deeply divided by systemic discrimination against its Catholic minority. By the 1960s, inspired by global civil rights movements, Northern Ireland's Catholics began protesting for equal rights. But these peaceful protests were met with severe hostility and heavy-handed police crackdowns. The whole situation boiled over entirely in 1969, plunging Northern Ireland into a devastating era of sectarian street violence that we now call the Troubles. It's a really complex web of factions here. You've got the Provisional IRA utilizing armed force to fight for the reunification of Northern Ireland with the Republic. On the other side, loyalist paramilitaries were completely determined to defend the union with Britain. And caught right in the middle were British state forces deployed to maintain control. It escalated into this devastating low-level war where everyday civilians were constantly caught in the crossfire of bombings and assassinations. This included awful tragedies like Bloody Sunday in 1972, when British paratroopers killed 13 unarmed protesters. The violence dragged on for almost 30 years. It was only after years of profound war weariness that secret negotiations finally began to make any headway. In 1994, the IRA and Loyalist paramilitaries both declared ceasefires. That crack in the door let international mediators step in to chair multi-party peace talks, which ultimately culminated in an absolute watershed moment in April 1998, the Good Friday Agreement. This agreement was honestly a masterclass in compromise. It affirmed Northern Ireland would remain British until a majority chose otherwise, but it also deeply acknowledged the Catholic minority. It created a new power-sharing government in Belfast where Unionist and nationalist parties had to jointly govern. But crucially, it created cross-border institutions allowing people in Northern Ireland to officially identify as Irish, British, or both, a brilliant way to handle incredibly complex identities. And with peace finally secured, both sides of the border flourished. Northern Ireland saw massive increases in investment and tourism. Meanwhile, the Republic of Ireland entered a period known as the Celtic Tiger, experiencing astounding economic growth. To go from a historically colonized, famine-ravaged land to one of Western Europe's absolute richest nations, it is a breathtaking turnaround. Which brings us to the present day, and a final question for you to ponder. The island remains divided into 2 separate states today, but the peace, cohesion, and cross-border cooperation of the last few decades have brought the 2 closer together than ever before. Considering the thousands of years of invasions, famines, and civil wars we just traced together,
Could this modern era of peace eventually lead to a completely united island of Ireland? It's a massive question,